In the end, this is why humans are considered a Category 12 dangerous species, Dran told instructor Zills, his limbs floating gently as he finished his speech. The hall was full of alien students who were shocked and silent. Their different limbs and sense sensors showed a mix of respect and fear. A brave Zorian in the front raised a pseudopod in a shy way. According to the student, instructor, if humans are that dangerous, why do they get into the Galactic Academy? The teacher turned his eyes to the student and smiled in a sneaky way. Ah, what a great question. Despite their, let us say, strong build, humans have shown themselves to be surprisingly good at negotiating with other species. Plus, their registration fees are through the roof. The board could not say no. There was a wave of nervous laughter that went through the room. The only exchange student from the United States, Sally, rolled her eyes in the back. Even though she was used to being seen as a living disaster, it still made her mad. Instructor Zill went on, let us move on to our next subject, Extreme Endurance 1001. This module is meant to prepare you for the worst conditions our galaxy has to offer. We will explore everything from planets with sulfuric precipitation to... Sally ignored Zill's rambling and thought about more pressing matters, like what she was going to eat for lunch that day. A sudden wave of fear among her friends woke her up to the real world. That is why we will be going on a trip to FX next week, the teacher said with a sly grin on his face. Pack your warm clothing and do not forget your radiation medicines, someone yelled, and chaos broke out in the room. Sally blinked in surprise. Facts sounded doable, a little cold, but nothing a warm coat could not fix. As the bell rang and Sally's alien classmates scattered in different stages of agitation, she walked over to the teacher's platform. Excuse me, sir, but I could not help but notice that everyone seemed pretty upset about this trip. Am I missing something? Instructor Zill's limbs shook in a way that Sally knew was the alien version of laughing. Miss Thompson, I forget that you do not know about our galactic classification system. Fax is a Class 1 death world, which is the most hostile planet type in the known universe, Sally said with a frown. But is not Earth also known as a death world? Yes, dear, a Category 12 to be exact. The difference is that Fex openly tries to end your life every second, while Earth acts more like a passive-aggressive killer. Sally could not help but laugh. When the teacher explained it that way, the student's eyes got narrower. So, what should I expect from this trip? You can expect temperatures close to absolute zero, 3 times the normal gravity, and an atmosphere so thick that you could swim through it if it were not so very acidic. Oh, and the animals in the area see everything that moves as a possible meal. Sally gave a thoughtful nod. That sounds like a normal Tuesday back in Australia. Do I need to bring anything special? Instructor Zill looked at her for a long time before laughing so hard he was jelly. I am always amazed by your species, Ms. Thompson. Just bring your normal self and a positive attitude. The school will provide all the survival gear you need. As Sally left the room, she could not help but feel excited. Things were getting a lot more interesting on this trip than she had thought. The next week, Sally was squished into a shuttle with her alien friends, who were wearing layers of safety gear that made them look like brightly colored, scared marshmallows. She looked at her clothes, which were a slightly thicker version of a normal spacesuit, and shrugged. She could at least move her arms and legs easily. Over the ship's intercom, Instructor Zill said, "All right, class. We will be landing on Fax in about 5 minutes. Remember your training, stay in your groups, and for the love of all that is holy, do not attempt to pet the locals." Just as the ship started to descend, Sally thought she heard him say something about them trying to disembowel you. Zix, an alien named Glyer who was sitting next to Sally, looked at her with wide eyes full of fear. How can you stay so calm? We are about to land on the most dangerous planet in the sky, Sally asked. She patted his arm to reassure him. Calm down, Zix. It cannot be worse than shopping on Black Friday on Earth. Before Zix could ask what Walmart was and why war was involved, the ship landed suddenly. When the doors opened, a blast of cold air came in and turned the moisture in the air into a beautiful, short-lived snowflake. "Welcome to FX," Instructor Zill said happily, though his many protective layers made it hard to hear him. "Should we start our tour?" When the group stepped onto the planet's surface, Sally thought, "This is not too bad." But that thought quickly changed when she felt the strong gravity trying to squash her. The view in front of them was a scary mix of a frozen wasteland and active volcanoes, with random geysers of liquid methane shooting into the sky. "Now," Instructor Zill said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind and occasional methane explosions, "our first lesson will be on how to breathe properly in a corrosive atmosphere. Everyone, please take off your helmets." The class let out a collective gasp of horror, followed by a variety of other scary sounds. Sally raised her hand and asked, "Professor, quick question, are you crazy or are you trying to kill us? Because, honestly, if it is the latter, there are easier ways to do it." The teacher's eyes swiveled toward her, and she thought she saw a flicker of laughter. "Ah, Miss Thompson, you are always the joker." "Of course, I am not asking you to take off your helmets, this is just a thought exercise." "Sally, where's your helmet?" she asked as she blinked and realized that everyone was looking at her. When she touched her head, all she felt was her normal wild hair. "Oh," she said, realizing what she was saying. "I thought that was just a cool hat. Is that why everything smells like burning rubber and regret?" There was quiet for a while, broken only by the sound of what sounded like a T-Rex gargling lava in the distance. Then Instructor Zill laughed out loud, which surprised everyone. "Unbelievable," he yelled, swinging his limbs around wildly. "Miss Thompson, you have been taking Infex's air for 10 minutes and have not felt any bad affects. Do you know how unlikely that is?" Sally asked. "It is not great, but it is better than the smoke back in LA." The teacher laughed out loud, and soon everyone in the class was looking at Sally with a mix of fear and awe. She thought this trip would last a long time. As the day went on, Sally accidentally did better at every survival task the world threw at them. While her friends fought to stay standing in the heavy air, she walked as if she were on a casual stroll through the park, where the squirrels were huge and breathed fire. The teacher, Zill, pointed to a boiling pool of neon green liquid and said, "This is a great example of one of Fex's famous acid geysers. One drop of this on skin that is not covered, and, well, let us just say you would have a very bad day." Just then, the volcano exploded, sending a spray of sharp, acidic liquid flying through the air. The class ran around in fear, but Sally did not see what was going on until it was too late because she was looking at a moving jellyfish that looked like crystals. A big splash of acid hit her face right where it was uncovered. "Oh," she grumbled, more annoyed than scared. She wiped the liquid off with her hand, leaving behind only a slight tingle and what she thought was a pretty green tint on her skin. "Hey, Professor, is this supposed to do something, or is it just really bad at what it is supposed to do?" Instructor Zill's eyeballs looked like they were about to come out of his suit. For a moment, he could not find the right words. How?" Sally just shrugged. She told them, "I do not know, maybe I am just having a good skin day. But I gotta say, this stuff feels great, very cleansing. You guys should try it." The horrified looks on their faces, or other sense devices, told her they should not try it at all. As they continued their hike through the nightmare scenery, Sally found that she was liking it. Even though the non-stop blasts, gravity wells, and animals trying to eat her were annoying, it was still better than being a camp director in Florida that summer. Instructor Zills spoke with a mix of joy and fear in his voice, "And now we come to the last and most difficult part of our field trip. Behold the chasm of eternal screams. A huge chasm so deep that the Sally was very sure that the whirling swirls on the bottom were not just water vapor. Your job, the teacher said, is to cross this gap using only the materials given. He pointed to a pile of what looked like strange tinker toys and a few coils of rope that looked like they were made from some poor animal's innards. As her peers argued about the best way to do engineering, Sally walked to the edge of the gap and peered down into it. They often stopped to worry or pass out. She thought out loud, this makes me think of the time I went bungee jumping in the Grand Canyon. Except that I screamed a lot more and probably died. When she turned back to the group, they were all looking at her in shock. What? She asked, feeling awkward all of a sudden. As Sally looked down, she saw that her feet were about 6 inches above the ground. Do I have something on my face? Is it the acid? I knew that stuff was bad. Ms. Thompson, Instructor Zills said slowly, his voice a mix of awe and frustration. She smiled and said, well, would you look at that? I guess all that hot yoga paid off in the end. Hey, do you think this counts as crossing the chasm? I think I could just float over there. The teacher's soft body seemed to start to shrink a bit. He sighed and said, yes, Miss Thompson, I guess that would count as crossing the gap. Though I have to say, in all my years of teaching, I have never seen anything quite like this. Sally smiled in return. Thanks, Professor. I try to please, and sometimes I break the rules of physics. Sally could not help but think about the strange turn her exchange program had taken as she smoothly floated across the chasm of eternal screams and waved happily at her confused friends. She thought that Galactic University would have hard classes, cultural mistakes, and maybe even times when she missed Earth's less-than-perfect but familiar Death World. She was not planning on becoming the star student of Extreme Endurance 101 by accident, while treating one of the universe's most dangerous planets like an annoying theme park. Sally turned back to her teacher and students as she softly landed on the other side of the gap. She yelled across the vast expanse, so, she asked, what is next? I mean, this has been fun and all, but I'm starting to get hungry. Do you think any of those 6-legged woolly mammoths are edible? Instructor Zill's eyes drooped, which Sally had learned to mean that he had lost completely. He said with a tired sigh, Miss Thompson, I think you have more than proven your point. In fact, I dare say you have single-handedly redefined our knowledge of dangerous species adaptation. Sally smiled. Thanks, Professor. Does this mean I get extra credit? The instructor's soft body shook, possibly in laughter or tears. It was hard to tell with all the safety gear on. At this point, my dear, I was thinking about giving you an honorary doctorate in extreme endurance, along with maybe also defying all known laws of physics and biology. While the rest of the class started the hard work of building a bridge across the chasm, which was punctuated by frequent screams of terror and at least one existential crisis, Sally sat down on a rock that looked pretty comfortable to wait. She took a cereal bar out of her pocket and munched it slowly. Even in a world with Class 1 death, a girl's gotta eat. Something in the brochure about this exchange program said something about broadening horizons and challenging preconceptions. I just did not expect it to be quite so literal, she said to no one in particular. One of her classmates, a Zonian that looked a lot like a living fern with eyes, stopped building a bridge to wave a frond at her. It rustled and asked, "How are you so awesome?" Sarah gave a helpful answer, adaptable. Devastatingly charming? The Zonian finally said, insane, and its leaves fell down in defeat. Sarah laughed. Oh, that is just the human spirit, my chlorophyll-filled friend. Where you see certain death, we see a fun weekend activity. Where you see impossible odds, we see a challenge to be overcome. Where you see a nightmare hellscape of a planet actively trying to kill us every second, we see that too, but we also see a chance to prove ourselves. She paused and took another bite of her granola bar. Extra, I think all those gamma rays are giving me superpowers, so bonus. Suddenly, the whole planet shook so hard that the half-built bridge and its builders almost fell into the abyss. Sarah, who was still sitting comfortably on her rock, just raised an eyebrow. She asked, Professor, is planet-wide seismic activity part of the curriculum, or is this more of an extracurricular thing? Instructor Zill, who had been having a heated argument with a GBBL student about the strength of intestine-based rope, turned all four of his eyes towards Sarah. This has never happened before, he stuttered. Tectonic action has not happened in HFX in over 10 million years, Sarah said with a wise nod. Oh, I see. So we are seeing something that only happens once every 10 million years. Cool. Do we get extra credit for that too? Before the teacher could answer, the ground shook so hard that it was probably a mix of frustration and grudging respect. The gap got bigger, and its edges started to fall apart like cookie bits in space. Instructor Zill yelled, "Everyone back to the ship," as his limbs flailed in fear. Abort mission. Abort. The class did not need to be told twice. They gave up on their half-finished bridge and started running back the way they came, their bodies flapping in fear. Sarah, on the other hand, stayed sitting on her rock, which was now dangerously close to the gaping hole in the ground. She called out, guys. I do not mean to be a bother, but I am pretty sure this rock is about to become a permanent resident of the chasm of eternal screams. Is there any chance of a lift?" Her classmates, who were already halfway back to the safety of their landing site, looked back at her with a mix of horror and indecision on their faces. Zix, her glider seatmate from before, was the one who finally got up the nerve to talk. He spoke quickly and shakily, "But how can we help? You are on the other side of the chasm, and our bridge is broken," she said. Sarah looked down at the gaping chasm below her and then back at her friends who were running away. She slowly smiled. She shook her fist and said, "Well, I guess it is time to see if those abilities have kicked in yet." She then got off her perch, which was falling apart quickly, took a deep breath, and jumped across the gap with such grace that Olympic long jumpers would have been green with envy. As Sarah flew through the air, the wild winds of facts whipped through her hair. Time seemed to slow down. Below her, the gap roared with sadness because it had missed out on a snack the size of a person. Back behind her, the rock she was sitting on finally gave up and fell into the abyss with a sad rumble. There was a moment when it looked like Sarah might make it. Then, at the very top of her jump, gravity remembered that it was supposed to be 3 times stronger on this awful planet and pulled her down hard. She yelled, "Oh, come on," as she fell toward the foggy deep. They told me I would have superpowers. Just when she thought everything was over, a tentacle shot out and wrapped around her wrist. Sarah looked up and saw Instructor Zill, whose body was made of jelly and was stretching, attached to the edge of the cliff by a chain of her alien students. The teacher grunted, "Gotcha," and his eyes were swollen with effort. "But I have to say, Ms. Thompson, your love of dramatic actions is going to give me an aneurysm, if my species can even have them." Sarah was pulled to safety with a big heave and a lot of scared screaming from the alien student chain. She landed hard on the ground with a thud and was grinning from ear to ear. She gasped, "Thanks, Professor, I owe you one. Maybe I will even start wearing that helmet you keep talking about." Instructor Zill's eyes drooped in the way Sarah had come to know as his "why do I even bother" looked outward or phrase. "Miss Thompson, at this point, I am sure you could survive a supernova with just a clever one-liner and your sheer audacity." As the group hurriedly made their way back to the ship, Sarah could not help but feel proud. It is possible that she did not really ace the class, but she did make an impact. Once everyone was safe on the transport ship and speeding away from Fex's surface that was breaking apart, Instructor Zill spoke to the class. He looked at Sarah with serious eyes and gave her a smile and a thumbs up. "Well," he said, his tentacles still a little shaky from the struggle, I think we can all agree that this field trip was educational in ways I never could have imagined. The teacher went on, I think we have all learned something useful about how unpredictable Deathworlds and the beings that live in them are. Miss Thompson, would you care to share any final thoughts with the class? Sarah, who was hair-wringing acid, looked up in surprise. She stood up and spoke to her shocked friends. Oh, sure, she said. I guess what I have learned is that extreme is just a matter of view. What one person sees as a nightmare hellscape is just a slightly spicy Tuesday to another. She paused and thought about what to say next. But more importantly, I think we have all seen how important it is to work together today. Sure, I might be able to breathe in that corrosive atmosphere and accidentally defy gravity, but I would not be here without all of you guys making that silly alien chain to pull me out of that chasm. The class stared at her in stunned silence for a moment before starting to applaud tentatively, or whatever their species equivalents were. Sarah had learned that Instructor Z's eyelids were curled into what looked like a smile. He said, "Well said, Ms. Thompson. I have to say, I am not sure how to grade this field trip. On the one hand, you showed survival skills that had never been seen before. On the other hand, you set off a global disaster." Sarah shrugged. "Split the difference and give me a B," she asked. The professor's soft body shook with what might have been laughing. "As we had already talked about, I think we can do better than that. Because of your unique contributions to the field of extreme endurance, I am suggesting you for an honors doctorate." The class cheered, and even the most scared students were able to join in. As the cheers stopped, Zix raised a shaky pseudopod. "Professor," he asked nervously, "does this mean we will be going on more field trips with Sarah?" The whole class looked at Instructor Zill with faces that were both scared and excited. The professor's eyes went to Sarah, who was doing a terrible job of pretending she was not guilty. "Well," he said slowly, "I guess that depends on whether the Galactic University's insurance policy covers planet damage caused by human mischief." Sarah smiled. "Oh, come on, Professor, you know as well as I do that they will be begging me to come back. After all, who else is going to keep your extreme endurance class interesting?" Sarah could not help but feel excited about what the rest of her exchange program might bring as the transport ship zipped through the galaxy, leaving behind a crumbling Vex and a very confused group of scientists from Galactica. Who knew what other fun things were in store if this was just the first field trip? The galaxy was not ready for humanity's unique set of survival skills, that much was clear. But they came anyway, ready or not.